Hello and welcome to yet another session of the NPTEL course titled 20th Century American Drama. We are now reading through Arthur Miller's play, Death of a Salesman, and we've been looking at some of the predominant themes which define not just the concerns of this particular play, but also of some of the dominant concerns of the American society during that time, the late 1940s. So we're looking at a time, the post-war period, which is very significant in the production of a certain kind of theatrical performance in a certain kind of dramatic concerns. And through the technique of realism, we find that Arthur Miller has been exemplifying what a typical American family is going through, particularly when they are facing disillusionment and failure, when they realize that the American dream is not quite working out the way they ideally wanted it to work out. So if we go through the scenes very quickly again, in the first scene, it opens in the house in Brooklyn where Willie and Linda have a family with their two sons, and there are certain exchanges within the domestic space which gives us a sense of what the family is going through and also about how the society realities are being negotiated with on a daily basis. This play, as mentioned before, captures a very tiny span of time in Willie's life, but it keeps moving back and forth. There are a number of time switches which happen in the course of this play that gives us a sense of a holistic sense of what Willie Loman's life has been like, how his childhood, his kids' childhood, and what their ambitions and the failures and the negotiations that they have been facing as a family, as individuals, and also as people negotiating with this new way of life projected by the American dream. So in scene 2, we find that Happy and Biff, both of them are at home, and there are certain conversations, there are certain exchanges from which we get to know of the kind of people they are and the kind of aspirations their family had on them, and the kind of life that Willie Loman particularly aspired to get through them. And there is a time switch in scene 3 itself. The scenes are not designated as in the play. There's no mention of a change of scene, but we do realize that with the change of background and with these different episodes coming in, this is how the different scenes have been. This is how we identify these different scenes in Act 1. So we find that Willie is a person who's constantly living in denial. So in scene 3, when Willie is gifting the boys a punching bag, and also when he realizes that Biff has apparently stolen a ball from the boys' locker room from his high school, Willie gets a bit defensive about Biff's act. Because in Willie's mind, and this is, please bear this in mind, that this is happening in the past, and these are all part of Willie's memories, which keeps coming back, which keeps flooding back in his mind even while he's living through the present. So sometimes he also finds it difficult to differentiate between the present and the past. So even while he is instructing his son to return the ball, he is also very defensive about that act. He even refers to that as an initiative, and we find that this denial, this difficulty to acknowledge the imperfections, not just in his own life, but also in the lives of his sons. That's something that becomes very detrimental to them as a family. It is, we find him this as a recursive pattern. We find because of this, all of them having certain difficulties in terms of associating, in terms of negotiating with the reality that they are living in. In Scene 4, which is an extension of Scene 3, which continues to be set in past, we find that both the boys are in school, and this is also there's also a dichotomy that we find over here when we are contrasting Willie's character with Charlie's. So in the same way, these adults are very different. We find that Biff and Happy are also very different from Burnett, who is seen as a boy who will not really make it in life. And Charlie and Bernard are seen as very, very conservative compared to Willie, Biff, and Happy, who are willing to take chances. And their belief in American dream is so invested, so deeply invested, that it begins to reflect in the way they go about their everyday life, in the way in which they have their value systems and their priorities in place. And Willie even goes to the extent of defending Biff and Happy even when they are making unethical decisions, even when they are doing things which could potentially harm their future, harm their career. And we find that Willie, Biff, and Happy, they always team up against Charlie and Burnett, who seems to be continuing to believe in a fairly conservative world order where it's more about hard work, while for Willie, Biff, and Happy, it's more about how a person presents himself or herself in front of the society. It's all mostly about being well liked, and that's something that we find throughout this play. Willie gets a lot of his ego is massively fed when he realizes that he is very well liked, and he expects that since his sons are very well liked by their classmates, they will also be huge successes in this new order of life, where they are pursuing American dream, where any person can be anything irrespective of their background. So we find these contrasts very, very useful in order to analyze the predicament that Willie is in at the moment when the play is happening. It also helps us understand the kind of dilemma and the kind of conflicts that his sons have in mind in terms of trying to negotiate these different worldviews, because on the one hand they know that they're very inefficient in making money in terms of reaping success, but they also know that it is that there's something fundamentally flawed with the way they have organized their life in terms of the prioritization, in terms of the things that they should have ideally valued. And this comes in mostly in terms of a regret. This comes in mostly in the language of regret and language of lament, which also causes a lot of domestic conflict within the Lohman family. So this scene is very important. In scene 5, where we find that there is a new character whom we never really meet, and we do not get to know of who this woman really is. There's a woman's character who gets introduced, who is largely there as a figment of imagination in Willie's mind, but we also get to know that she is very real. She is part of a certain past that Willie does not want to acknowledge, that Willie wants to live in denial with. So in scene 5, Willie begins, there's a part where he begins to exaggerate his sales because, he is unable to accept failure. And that's a hallmark of his character. And it also seeps into his son's ways of looking at their lives too. So he's always manipulating and denying his reality. But Linda is a person, perhaps the only person in that entire family, in the entire scheme of this play, who is able to see through different characters, who is able to engage with reality in a way that one ideally should. Of course, she also lapses into this into a state of denial quite frequently, keeping in tune with the general ambience of the play. But we find that Willie is entirely unable to accept criticism. He's constantly finding fault with the people around him, with the system, and with the way in which things are not working out. He's constantly blaming something or the other for things not working out well in his own life. So in order to deal with that, he invents a reality in which he's successful. He invents a reality where he can exaggerate his worth by exaggerating the kind of money that he is bringing in. But Linda, of course, sees through it, and Willie also accepts that he's been exaggerating, and there are these difference in figures in terms of his commission that she identifies. But she's also very gentle. She's very reassuring and very understanding, even when she is aware of this side of Willie's personality. We find Linda's domesticity very appealing, and we find that she's also a very secure woman in a certain way, and this is something that she continues to remain as this center which holds that family together. Even Biff and Happy are totally in awe of what she is, and there's one scene where one of her sons say they've stopped making this kind of women, and they broke the mold after she was made, and she is seen as this foundation, this center which holds the family together. And we do find that she is perhaps the most practical of all the characters, and when the woman is being introduced into the play entirely through Willie's memory, we find that the woman's role is largely symbolic. She exists as a fantasy, as an unreal dream that Willie would want to pursue, in contrast with Linda's security and domesticity. She is neck deep in the dailiness of life, in the ordinariness of the many things that the family is dealing with, especially in the wake of such massive failures from different quarters. So the woman emerges there as a liberating figure. And we find that Willie is very different. His language is very different. He's more playful when he is with the woman. But of course, in scene 6, we find that he is also deeply guilt-ridden, because, he has, when we realize through the course of these different memories and these different recollections and some snippets of conversation, that Willie is now feeling tremendously guilty about this affair, apparently, that he had with the woman. And in scene 6 in particular, we find that in Willie's mind, the memories of Linda and the woman keep overlapping. So if we could take a look at this scene very quickly, we find that the woman finds him very appealing, and the woman he has these memories of the woman telling Willie that she was drawn to Willie because of his sense of humor, and that is something which massively satisfies his ego as well. So right after these memories, right after his recollection of this conversation with the woman who remains unnamed throughout the play, we find that he's also in the middle of this conversation with Linda. So these two things overlap, and what also acts as a trigger over here is a certain object, the stockings. So we get to know from the course of the play that he has been gifting stockings to this woman when his wife has been struggling to make both ends meet by mending old socks. So the stockings here, they are presented as a tangible reminder of Willie's transgression. So he almost loses his temper when he sees that Linda is mending her stockings. So there is this entire scene which you can see on screen now, where I won't have you mending stockings in this house, now throw them out. Yeah, so that's a kind of rage that he has while he sees Linda mending the stockings. It's more not really about the act of mending the stockings, but that reminder that reminds him of his own transgression, his infidelity, which he continues to live in denial with too, because in his mind, he's not that kind of a person, but he of course has transgressed. That's also a knowledge that Biff has, which keeps coming back to haunt them in their relationship, and which stands as a major impediment in their way towards reconciliation. Linda is, of course, she continues to engage with him with a lot of compassion and with a lot of understanding, that we even feel that the audience, as well as the readers, as well as their sons, Biff and Happy, they also feel that Willie does not quite deserve that kind of an attention, that kind of compassion and kindness from this woman, from Linda. So this is a very significant scene, not just in terms of this revelation, but also due to the ways in which these memories begin to overlap. And we find that his mental condition is deteriorating. These are only signals through which we get to know the degree of deterioration that Willie is facing. Scene 7, in scene 7, we witness this accentuation of Willie's, the deterioration of Willie's mental faculties, and we also find him taking it out on his family. If you read through the following segments, we would realize that Willie is guilt-ridden. He's also very agitated. But rather than focusing his own failure, he chooses to focus on Biff's failure. So Biff's life appears as a counterfoil. So Biff's life is this canvas where he can take out his anger and his disillusionment with himself, with his family, and with posterity. All of those things get played out in the engagement, in the exchanges between Willie and Biff. And this deeply disturbs Linda, and she tries her best to bring about a sense of reconciliation between the two. But we also realize that in the course of the play, that whatever reconciliation, any kind of peace or any kind of settlement that they achieve is very temporary, because there are larger systemic problems out there further complicating Willie's mental health, which is deteriorating at a very, very fast pace, and things are beyond repair when the play begins. So the play begins at such a time in the history of America as well, in the post-war period, when the nation is also trying to engage with multiple problems of not just socio-political and cultural levels, also the psychological problems, and trying to offer certain models of economy, certain models of corporate systems to deal with it. So we find Willie and the likes of him and families like him caught in this dilemma, caught in this difficult period where the individual's life is deeply enmeshed, is very heavily intertwined with the choices made by the nation at large. So the problems that are being explored in this play are private in some way, but they are also very systemic. They are part of these larger structures too, in so many different ways. In scene 8, we find that the way in which Willie's memory operates, it's becoming increasingly problematic. In scene 7, we find that there's an overlap of memories, which also makes him difficult to deal with the reality, which is Linda, and because that's being constantly superimposed by the woman's presence, by the woman's voice, and by the things that, the emotions that he shared with the woman. And his feeling of guilt and failure makes it all the more complex for him to deal with his present. In scene 8, we find a complete deterioration because the memories not just overlap, they fuse into each other. So there's a fusion of these multiple memories happening even when he is trying to live in the present, even when he is trying to negotiate with the present during the time span that the play captures. So there is this scene where Uncle Ben appears as a projection of his memory. Uncle Ben is someone whom he looks up with a lot of awe, and he always thinks of that as a choice, leaving with Uncle Ben to explore the diamond mines and making a lot of money through that. That's something that remains in his mind as an ambition that he never pursued, a possibility which could have yielded him and his family better results than the menial job that he has chosen. While he continues to remain proud of the fact that he could have made it big in the sales world, though we never get a sense of what he is selling, at the same time there's always this lost this nostalgia about what he could have done with Uncle Ben. And that's no longer a possibility, that's no longer a choice, but he's entirely incapable of separating one from the other when he is, particularly in scene 8. So that's also a time when he's trying to have this conversation with Charlie, and we know that the Uncle Ben, who is a projection of his memory, it keeps fusing into the present. So he's unable to have a cohesive conversation with Charlie, who also, leaves because he's so annoyed with this he's irritatingly annoyed with the non-engagement from Willie and his completely incoherent responses to whatever they are talking about. So this fusion of multiple memories is very important over here, because that's also Willie's way of dealing with the present. He knows that the present cannot be changed. He knows that there's a past to which he cannot go back to. So he invents new realities. He invents certain things which are a fusion, which are an amalgamation of what could have happened, what happened, and what is in the present. And he invents a new present. He invents a new future. He invents a new life entirely for himself, which becomes more and more telling as the play progresses. In scene 9, where there's a recollection about the past, where he is thinking again and again about Uncle Ben's African adventure and the kind of fortune that he made and the kind of possibilities that Uncle Ben had offered to Willie, but he denied it. He declined that at that point. But that itself is seen as a huge achievement, that Uncle Ben thought of Willie, thought of offering a position to Willie, though he denied it, though he declined it at that moment, because the profession that he chose to pursue, that seemed like more promising. So he's at this stage in his career, in his life, where there is a lot of disillusionment, there's a lot of regret, and he needs to find many ways to deal with it, to overcome it. So he's thinking about a certain instance from the past, which is entirely a recollection of his memory, where Ben advises the boys to be very aggressive when they are going for something, regardless of the ethical position, regardless of the value systems that they have belief in. That is something which causes a lot of discomfort in Linda's mind, and she wants the children not to grow up in that way, not to listen to Uncle Ben in that ways which might compromise their ethical positions, which might compromise the belief systems and the values that they have. But Willie always hadn't lost Uncle Ben's pursuit, and he still continues to fantasize that he's still in awe with the kind of choices that Uncle Ben made. So Willie, in fact, we find that in scene 9, he is almost rearranging the facts and events to manufacture success for himself, and by extension manufacture success for his sons too. So there's a brief moment when the insecurity that Willie is facing is traced to the absence of a father figure when he was growing up. And this gets superimposed into his present too, because at some level he thinks of himself as being this very supportive, very understanding father who has always encouraged his sons. But he also realizes that looking back, he was also a massive failure. As infidelity, the guilt that he's facing now, and the insecurities that he is facing, and the skewed system into which they all have got into. So all of that collectively leave him with this constant need, Willie with this constant need to gain approval and recognition from somewhere or the other. Ironically, Linda is one person who is constantly providing him with that, who's constantly saying lovely things about Willie, his career, his life, the choices that he has made, his emotional health, his the way in which he engages with the children. She is constantly supplying him with this, meeting his need to gain approval, recognition, compassion, affection. But Linda is not. He does not reciprocate well to Linda. Linda is almost taken for granted. That also becomes a problem very soon in the play, as we would realize. So in scene 9, we mostly find him trying to manufacture a new reality. So this could also be seen as a memory play in some form, where the memories that Willie has about his life, and some of them are real, some of them are fused with the present, and some of them are his aspirations, which have now become certain recollections of his past. All of them collectively define who Willie is. So Willie is not exactly not just the individual that he is at the moment, a salesman, a failed salesman, and someone who's about to lose his job. He's not just that. He is sum total. He's a sum total of what he remembers, and in fact his greatest strength and his failure, and what leads him to this these fatal things that happen to him, it all the kind of things that he recollects. So at various levels his memories become definitive to the entire family's life, and what would constitute their future as well. In scene 10, we find that it's a very, very crucial scene where the play, through Linda, acknowledges for the first time that Willie has been trying to kill himself. That comes as not as a huge revelation to the family, because this is something perhaps we get the sense from this the way the conversations progress, that this is something that they were always aware of, but the family did not want perhaps to acknowledge it. So being the only character who's able to see through each character, and who's able to understand the truth of the situations and what's going on inside each family member, Linda constantly attempts to reconcile Willie with his sons, but that's not entirely always successful either. So we find that when Biff is angry and ashamed about Willie's behavior, and there are a lot of subtext to that too. But Linda, as always, tries to defend Willie and says that he's not crazy, that Willie is not crazy, he's just exhausted. And she also breaks into this, she almost breaks down and tells them about how much Willie loved his sons and almost lived an entire life for their sons. And now because of this failure, since he cannot take this failure, he's been attempting to kill himself. Yeah. So this we will not go into the details at the moment, but when you read through scene 10 and scene 11, while we are also nearing the end of Act 1, we find that here is a family who is in the middle of this crisis, where there are these different kinds of failures that they are trying to deal with, and at the same time there is a man, the head of the family, who's also very suicidal, and the family does not want to acknowledge it, and for the same reason they don't have an active way to deal with it either. So the difference between Willie and Linda is that Linda is able to see things. Linda can, of course, distinguish between what is real and what is not. She's not living in a dream world at all. She's not living in the fantasy world at all. She knows what her husband and her sons are. He knows their worth and what their future looks like. But Linda also chooses to deny it. She does not always. There are these occasional moments when she comes out of that bubble and she is willing to engage with truth, but that also becomes the family then becomes a site of conflict that also becomes very difficult for all of them to deal with. But Willie, on the other hand, he comes across as a person who's totally incapable of distinguishing between fantasy and reality. And from his recollections, we realize that he had always functioned in that way. He was always living in an alternate world and trying to invent facts and trying to invent a future which may not be sustainable at all. That's very much evident in the way he brought up his sons, in the value systems that he was passing on, and in this unreal and almost fantastical hope that his kids will be huge successes in future, because they're also very well liked and because they are very good looking. And there are these notions that challenge all kinds of societal reality, which Willie had always nurtured. That those were the anchors on which Willie always relied as well. So we at the end of the day, we have these characters who are living in denial, different degrees of denial. And the moment one character is willing to come out of the denial, we find that there's no reconciliation possible anymore. It is all at the moment the denial, the surface, you peel away one layer of denial, you find that there's more conflict that the family has to deal with, much more than they are equipped to deal with. Yeah. So in scene 11, where there's a continuing argument between Willie and Biff. So very briefly during this argument, Willie assumes a position of authority and respect, but that does not last very long. And Biff actually resents the way Willie treats Linda. Linda is very accommodating, very compassionate. She's perhaps the only one who is staying this supportive with Willie throughout his life and career. But the way Willie treats Linda is most of the times without much respect, without any care, and he is very dismissive, and sometimes inadvertently too, because he's taken her so much for granted that he does not even see what she's doing to him. So Biff takes great offense at that, and there is this continuing argument between Willie and Biff. And Willie, of course, he can't sustain this for any longer either. So when the scene 12 ends, we find that Linda is trying to make the son and father reconcile. He encourages them to say goodnight to each other, and the day is coming to an end. There is an eerie sense of peace and order in the house, but the reader also gets this feeling that it's a very, very temporary phase, and this peace, this feeling of quiet and order is not going to last. So for a very brief moment before the day ends, at the end of Act 1, we get a sense of order prevailing. There's almost this, Biff is offering to do a number of things in order to make things fine, at least superficially. Emotionally, they still seem very estranged from each other, particularly, Linda is a woman who knows what is happening, who knows that Willie is very suicidal, knows that her sons may never really make it big in terms of a career, but in spite of that, she also wants to continue to pretend that things are all fine. So when the when Act 1 ends at the end of that day, What remains is, the things that remain are Linda's uncertainty, Biff's doubt, and Willie's constant, this continuing engagement with, the past, and the way in which he continues to live in denial of whatever is happening. So if we could quickly come down, go over to the play, and if we could quickly take a look at, how Linda has been defending Willie. I don't say he's a great man. Willie Loman never made a lot of money. His name was never in the paper. He's not the finest character that ever lived, but he's a human being, and a terrible thing is happening to him. So attention must be paid. He's not to be allowed to fall into his grave like an old dog. Attention must be finally paid to such a person. Yeah. So here is a woman who realizes what is happening. Here's a family now, they realize what he's been doing and the kind of mental deterioration that is happening to him, but they're also helpless. So what we are left with at the end of Act 1 is also a sense of helplessness, yeah, where there is a temporary restoration of order, a temporary restoration of a sense of hierarchy, but we know that it is all temporary. It may not last. It is just some brief moment of peace and order in the house, which to entirely manufactured, if one may say. So we find that this play continues to be very interesting by bringing together memories, dreams, confrontations, and arguments. And in the next session, we will look at Act 2 in detail and look at the major themes which are being brought together as the play is also leading towards a culmination. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next session.